So let's talk about the Georgian economy and how it's presently situated. Imagine how difficult the situation of Georgia is today in 2022, when on the one hand you have the war in Ukraine, and Ukrainians were really one big market to incoming tourists for this beautiful country. They all dream of Georgia, that's very beautiful country. The Georgians stand in solidarity with the Ukrainians, but obviously they are not in the position to make tourism here at this moment. In the north, then there is the terrible neighbor Russia, and of course many of them now they're coming as political refugees, but still of course there is much less exchange and trade and tourism. And of course the long-term consequences of the whole economic disaster which the war will bring to Russia, also because of the political crisis to come, but also because of our sanctions and the decoupling of Russia from the global and the European economy, is of course just the beginning. And that will be little trade between Georgia and Russia, and that's also good so. But the economic consequences are very hard. In the south there is Iran. It's also a very complicated partner and a de facto hostile state. They have brought a lot of tourists before to Georgia, and some of them will come again, but it will be not like in 2019, and it will be very difficult as well with Iran. So what is basically the situation? Of course, Turkey is a very important partner, but Turkey is already in the EU customs union and the NATO ally. And of course, Europe and America, no doubt. So EU and NATO, the West. So Georgia, out of poor economic necessities, the partners around it are breaking away. So Georgia has to Europeanize, if much more, in a way, radically or forcefully or accelerated as an economic survival strategy. It's of course much more easier for Moldova, which is in the European continent and so closely connected already to the European Romanian economy basically. But for Georgia, the effort must be politically. It is very important for Georgia to adopt the euro and to join the European Customs Union, not as a long-term, maybe in the future, but immediately now, as a very important measure to counter the crisis. On the same way like Montenegro has done that in 2002. You have to Europeanize much more intensively now as an answer to the current completely disaster in which you find yourself economically struck by the double blow of Russia's economic decline and of course of Ukraine's disaster as a result of that war, of aggression of Russia, and of course the consequent energy disaster, agricultural food prices, shortages, inflation, and so on and so on. To continue like you did before, somehow in between, is not gonna happen, and it will have dramatic consequences, and it is absolutely a failure. To fill all these tourist capacities must be the European and American tourists. Of course, from Asia they are all welcome, but volume must come from the German, from the Italian, from the American market now after the pandemic is over. And that's very important. And here to set the signal of European integration, joining the EU customs union and of course the currency is very much absolutely prerequisite. And by the way, Turkey needs also to fix the currency towards the euro and to have a lira, the backed lira, that's also very important. And economic reform then, under these premises, then you have to intensify EU accession in a totally new approach in the speed, in the manner, in the effort, because otherwise you find yourself completely alone. And that's the best strategy available. For economic reform as well, of course, that's why it's so important to have this EU accession status, the candidate status, because attached to it comes this so-called Institute for Pre-Accession. They are much more generous than the Eastern Partnership funding. Then of course we need a new infrastructure reconstruction effort, because not only Ukraine must be reconstructed, also Georgia must be rebuilt and reconstructed in modern European infrastructure terms, not by China, but of course by the funding of the EIB, the EBRD, and here must be Europeanized, the energy system, connected to the European energy system, the infrastructure system according to European lines. We have all the standards for all these things, and all of them must be adopted fully for Georgia to be fully part of the working internal markets, from digital to energy to transport to the agriculture to SMEs. All standards must be Europeanized, and that's the logic. And that's the only way for decent economic reform. A big infrastructure push obviously needs to be part of this European Now Connect Europe facility, and to really go massively into the infrastructure, in water, in waste, in municipal infrastructure, in energy, in highways, in railways, and in all the other aspects. That's absolutely important. Then, of course, what all goes along with the European SME model, competition law and SME support agencies on the regional level, then also funding for innovation, for research, for SME, access to finance. But it will be much easier already when it's all based on the euro. As we have seen, all these models work very well in Kosovo and Montenegro, which were traditionally much poorer countries and parts and regions than Georgia. But they had a better economic system, and that's the European system of the European currency, European customs system, European regulatory system, European system of SME support on the regional level, and then obviously also all the hundreds and thousands of different regulations which are so important, always implemented at the lowest possible European standard. That's good, that's competitive, but implemented at the European standards. And that's the way to reform a country like Georgia at this moment. And politically, of course, I've talked already about federalism, Cyprus model, integration. That's all possible and is required, but it must be based on the European small and medium enterprise model, and this is the way for economic reform. On taxation, I think it's important to have lower taxation. 10% tax is enough for a country as Georgia. Luckily, you have the flat tax already, and you are not in any failed socialist system, but you have ended progressivity. That was very good decision, and that must be kept, and also stay on decency in that direction. But 15% is too much. A country must be like Macedonia with 10%. That's the better tax level. Also on income tax, on VAT, of course, to Europeanize it and make it very clear that this is the future, and have a very clear European VAT system. And of course break the trade relation with Russia now, and also join the EU sanctions against Russia, and be fully online in this direction, in the full integration agenda. That means also then joining NATO and the EU, and it has a big effort economically to attract investors. It's very important to have this external security, the internal political stability, and the regulatory framework of the European Union. That matters very much for investment security. That's a very big signal for the investment community that their money is safe, based on the euro, based on the regulatory system of the EU, and based on the external security of NATO. So that is why Macedonia, for example, works much better now, and Montenegro, and also Albania, and also Croatia, because they have this clarity in that direction. So these macro-political issues have a huge effect on the macroeconomic situation, and also on the microeconomic situation, because in many aspects Georgia is already pretty optimal in microeconomic reform, especially in regulatory standards. Nobody can beat Georgia in that one. You are better than Austria in all these terms, and I don't need to talk about European cadastre, done, about regulatory reform, done, about easiness of licensing and deregulation, done, because there are major achievements already on that one. Also the good governance agenda here, very good, there's a lot of good governance. What of course is missing then is real competition law. There is already progress, but then you have a very small market, and you need to be in one European internal competition market. That's even in Europe not fully developed, but obviously in small markets they can be easily cornered by the political system and by the key players, 5 key political players, 5 oligarchs, and a market of 3.5 million is already cornered very well. And that's a big problem, and that needs to be tackled by real strict implementation of European competition law, and also enforcement of it, and also efforts to work in anti-collusion. pollution we have in Europe, from Malta to Slovakia to Austria to Bulgaria, but Georgia can do more and should do more, because that's ultimately the way to really have better growth numbers. When you have more transparency, openness, good governance, you have in many ways with the digitalization of your administration already in good efforts, but more can be done on that one as well. And then this will have a major effect. And the key areas like tourism related infrastructure investment and resorts, hotels and all these things, they are already working. But when you see compared to Montenegro, it's still lagging behind. This country is in a big crisis. Let's have no illusion about it. And this crisis can be only tackled with the help of serious European funding, serious European accession perspective, and serious Europeanization of the way the economy is governed, the political situation, a consensus, but also the administration must be Europeanized in all forms and aspects. And that's the answer to the Russian war. And as I've said many times on these videos, Europe is the answer to Russian wars from 1950 onwards. The war of aggression in Korea has unified us in the beginning, and then the other wars of aggression of Soviet allies, from Vietnam to Afghanistan, to of course the wars in the Balkans and the wars in Ukraine and all these disasters. Europe is the answer to the Russian aggression. And again, here we have to be the answer for the crisis in Georgia today. We must Europeanize. We must Europeanize in a unprecedented, no, it's not unprecedented. We did the same after the Balkan Wars. That's why I came to explain. We did the same after the Balkan Wars. It makes a lot of sense. We did the same for Montenegro, for Kosovo, for Croatia, for Macedonia, the currency stabilization, the macroeconomic stabilization, the infrastructure packages, the Regional Cooperation Council, the CEFTA, the anti-corruption agenda, and all these other attached agendas which we have promoted so successfully and which are so important, and they work so well. And Georgia should join the Southeastern European Cooperation Council mechanism, and that would be a better way. That is also what I say in my interviews. I have started with the first one. If there are more media requests, I'm most happy to answer. But most of all, make a big effort on the 19th of June to promote a European Union membership for Georgia. This is very important. If that fails, I think Georgia will be in a big fundamental crisis. And that I don't hope so for this beautiful country, because it's a great place to be. And I really love and like Georgia, European Georgia. And I don't mean that party politically. I want to have this country in the European Union. Again, I apologize, I didn't work on that one too much in the 90s and in the 2000s, in the 2010s. But in the 2020s, I want to devote my time and effort, my energy for European Georgia, European Ukraine and European Moldova. This is very good, and I will do that from Vienna, and I will be very active here on this podcast. And please support European Georgia. Thanks a lot and bye.